YouTube, fair warning, I'm going to go on a little, quote-unquote rant here about something that's been bothering me that's going on. First, little backstory on it. So, any of you that watch the channel, I attempted to thru-hike the Pacific Crest Trail last year. Spoiler alert, because of COVID, that didn't happen. After a few months off trail, due to COVID and some other situations, which I'll discuss, I was able to go back out and did the Oregon section of the Pacific Crest Trail, which, if you don't know, the whole thing goes from Mexico to Canada, Mexico border, California border, all the way to the Washington, Canada border. So I was able to do the Oregon section, which is, less than 2, 3, 4, 5. It's like 1/5 of the whole trail, somewhere around there, roughly, earlier this year. So, anyway, the backstory is there's a PCTA, which is the Pacific Crest Trail Association, and if you're doing a long distance through hike, they issue permits in this weird system where you have to get online. I think there's like 2 different days of the year, and you log on like a half an hour early, and then anyone that's logged on, they put you in a certain spot in a line, and then you get to choose your start date. And the idea behind it is a lot of people attempt to thru-hike, but not a lot of people finish. And so the problem they were having before they had any kind of permit system in place is that people would all kind of pick the ideal dates, which are usually in the mid-April range. That way you have enough time to finish before you hit snow in Washington, and you're not starting at a time when it's insanely hot in the desert. So there's like a key area where most people kind of suggest. Everyone's got their own opinion about what the best time and month and whatever. So before a permit system, before this PCTA permit system, I don't know the whole history of it, everyone would pick kind of the same time and leave at the same time, because a lot of people attempt, but not a lot of people finish. You have a large number of people at the beginning and a lot smaller, as the herd thins, as people move north, people that are starting south and going north. So you had a lot of inexperienced people out on trail in Southern California in the desert, all at the same time. It was just not good for the trail to have that much going on. Hold on just a second. Okay, anyway, cop pulled out behind me while I was recording, and it was kind of at a perfect angle where you could have seen the camera. I don't know what the legality is on filming all this. Probably fine, but if you thought I was watching a movie or something, that might not be good. Anyway, what was I talking about? PCTA permits. Twice a year they give them out. It's a weird system. You get there ahead of time, then it's kind of like an order in line. When we did mine, they let you do multiple devices, even on the same network, so you can sign in. We're signed into the iPad and both our phones and the computer and our laptop about a half an hour before, 15 minutes before they release. And then they give you an order, and then you pick your device that's in the closest order, the soonest in line. Basically put you in a queue, and then I think everyone's got like 10 minutes or something in each position. And it's funny because you can come up at I think our iPad came up at 1 million something in the queue. And it's not because there's that many people putting in for it, it's because there's that many devices signed on. So you can start at if you hit 1 million and then you wait a few minutes, as everyone signs off and stays on their one device that's the furthest along in the line, then suddenly you go from 1 million to down to 400 to down to 200 or whatever real quick, because people are signing off once they get the initial placement. So it's kind of not the best system for it, but it is a free permit. It gives you the right to hike the whole trail. So if anyone checks you at any spot where you would need a different permit, if you have a long distance permit, and I think you have to at least be hiking 500 miles of the trail straight through, and I think they've been adjusting the rules in the last couple of years to it has to be continuous, and if you're off trail for longer than a week, it changes. I don't know all the details of it, but I think they've been trying to adjust it. But basically, if anyone were to stop you, which I hear is very rare, and ask you for a permit in any wilderness section, if you've got the PCT permit and you're on the PCT, obviously, then you're good. And I think it's good for camping through most of it. There's some limited entry places throughout the trail where where you still can't camp even with that permit. You have to have a specialty one, or it's not allowed at all. And I think in California you also have to have a stove permit or something for having your stove out there in certain sections. But anyway, so PCTA releases these permits twice a year. You do the whole system. Anyway, I signed up for that. Got my permit, did the Thru-Hike, did the first 7 days or whatever it was, 10 days, 77 miles into the permit. Never had anyone check it, but you pick your start date. So I had picked March. I wanted to go earlier to try to avoid the hot weather, and also because I didn't know how quickly we're going to go with the family following along in the RV, to give us plenty of time to get accustomed to the mileage and kind of figure out what we're doing. Unfortunately, because of that, I picked early on a year where they had record rain, record snowfall, so it wasn't actually the best to pick March. And I keep thinking, what if we would have done April, like most people do? How different, where would we even be right now? How different things would be, but that's another video for another time. Anyway, my point being, we got about 10 days in, and this is kind of a spoiler for the other videos too, but COVID was hitting. We were kind of debating, like, what are we supposed to do with this? Most our family and friends had texted and said, you're in the perfect spot. You're away from civilization most of the time. You're just popping into town for some resupplies. You're limited to the people you're running into, and the people you're running into out on the trail and out there are not in big city or big spreader areas. So like, okay, maybe we're in the perfect spot for this, which is what a lot of people told us. So we're kind of like, okay, well, we're going to press on, avoid the weather, but press on was the plan. And then the PCTA, who issues these permits, sent out an email to anyone who had one and posted on their website asking us all for the safety of the trail communities, and the towns along the trail, and trail angels and all the people associated with it to get off trail for the safety of all that. So then me and my wife didn't know what we were going to do. We debated it. We went back and forth for, I think, a couple days trying to decide. We kind of felt like if they're asking us to go, then this must be a good reason. I watched a couple videos online. Darwin on Trail, who is a YouTuber, one of the biggest hiking YouTubers, he was on the AT at the time, the Appalachian Trail, which is on the East Coast, doing a section of that. He'd already done the whole thing, and he released a couple of videos about, the AT Association asking people to get off trail, and how important it was for YouTube creators and the figureheads of the trail community or hiking community to set a good example and get off trail for these towns' safety, and because the agencies were asking, because the agencies do so much to maintain these trails, respect what they're asking. And that was kind of the last straw for us, where it's like, yeah, he's right on, I agree with that. If they're asking us to do this, they do so much for the trail, so we'll get off trail. So we did, long story short, which I'll cover in another video, basically called the trip off, came home. And COVID and everything that followed in 2020, and you guys saw, I eventually went out and did the hike. Now the rant, or the thing I want to talk about that's very frustrating to me right now, is I just saw recently that the PCTA is going forward with permits for the class of 2021. This next group of people coming up in March, April, May, whenever they're getting their start date, they're going to issue permits. So first and foremost, I want to say I'm super happy for those people who are going to get to go in 2021. So this is nothing against them. This is not that I would want to take that away from them in any way, because I understand having it taken away for me in 2020, especially for people who started in 2020, respected the PCTA's wishes, got off trail, and now get to go back in 2021. That's awesome. And it's nothing against those people. I'm not saying this isn't an opinion about whether they should be hiking or not hiking. That's not what it's about. My frustration is the PCTA now coming out and saying we're going to be able to issue permits for this year. Because ultimately, I don't want to get political here, that's the last thing I want to do, but ultimately, as far as what we've heard, as far as what experts are saying, and everything that I've heard, as far as COVID, nothing is better. There might be this new strain, numbers are at record highs, more people have died than ever. So, as someone said, and I'd made this comment before, we have learned a lot since they were first asking me to get off trail in March, which is super true. It was the beginning of everything. We had no idea what this was. But ultimately, as far as the reasons the PCTA asked us to get off trail, as far as spreading the virus and spreading it to these small communities, and people coming from overseas, which a lot of people do to hike the trail, that could be possibly bringing something with them, all those reasons that were valid in 2020, or the PCTA thought was valid in 2020, are still valid in 2021. And you can debate whether those reasons are good or bad, and lots of people have, and if the PCTA should have done what they did or not. That's all legit, and there's different opinions on that, and that's fine. But my point is that the PCTA chose in 2020, with the information that they had, to say it was not safe and ask us to get off trail. And in my situation, I uprooted my life, sold my house, sold my car, quit my job, changed everything, and have a family, so I had this 1 year to do it. So it's not like some other people's situations where it's like, okay, not this year, then next, or I can start and I'll come back to it, and it's a dream I can get down the line. And I hope to, down the line, be able to attempt to do it again. But there's nothing in the foreseeable future, the way my life's going, for that to happen. So it's not like, oh, I gave up on it, but I'll be back. There's no certainty of that. And I'm only getting older, and my kids are getting older, and the ability for them to travel with me, or the situation couldn't have been more perfect than what it was. So far, I don't see anything being as good as that. So it's when I agreed to respect their wishes and get off trail and try to set that example on YouTube, or just for my fellow hikers who I talk to, and say this is what I chose to do, even though a lot of them are like, this is bogus, we don't need to, it's not as big a deal for what we're doing. Chose to respect their wishes and do that, and had to give it completely up, and don't know if I'll be back for it. It's a lot different. So I'm very frustrated with there not being a change in the overall situation, yet somehow the PCTA is okay with putting out permits this year, when the same reason you ask us to get off trail, all the things you listed, are just as relevant today as far as the information goes. So I feel like one of two things. If the PCTA is perfectly willing, I don't know if they're a board of directors or whatever, but perfectly able to discuss this, and as they've learned about COVID, and as they've talked to the trail towns, which they should have done ahead of time and not assumed, because from my experience in hiking Oregon, a lot of the trail towns and resorts were so happy to have us out there, because that's, for a lot of them, their income for the year, or sustains them for the year, is for when the group of PCT hikers come through, or a big chunk of their income. So they need that. So to say, oh, it's for their health and safety, well, as a lot of people have debated in this whole year, health and safety versus being able to buy food. So how do you weigh those things? And a lot of those trail communities need the hiking community to come through there. I'm not saying everyone. I'm sure there's communities that didn't like the hikers going through. There's opinions on all sides. But I don't know that the PCTA did the proper research before asking such a big thing of us to get off trail, and should have considered the fact that not everyone can just reschedule this. Like, it's a 6-month trip across the United States. You know, it's like, it's not a little thing. And a lot of people have done a lot of things to make it happen on the year it happens. So when you're going to ask, and I understand COVID's not a little thing, but when you're going to ask that, you got to be sure, and you got to do more research, or give it more time, or don't jump to too many conclusions. And I know a lot of people have. That's not something that the PCTA is the only person that's guilty of that in this year, is jumping to conclusions or being too knee-jerk. And I get we want to err on the side of safety. I do understand that too. So anyway, my frustration is that when they reevaluated, which could have been the case this year, and said, okay, let's look at 2021, what are we going to do? If they came to the conclusion that it is safer now, or the risks that they were concerned about are no longer there, or they overreacted before, that's fine. People have the right to change their mind with new information. We've learned a ton. I'm all for that. But if that's the case, there needs to be, I feel, an apology issued to the class of 2020 for jumping the gun, because, at least for me personally, and most people I heard that got off trail, we did it out of respect for the PCTA and what they were asking. It wouldn't have been just any person at Trail Town saying, you need to get off trail, and then we would have done it. It's because of the respect for the association and what they've done for the trail, to bring awareness, to bring conservation to it, to take care of it, and those type of things, and to set an example in the trail community that we got off trail. So we did it for them. So if they made a mistake, and now when they reevaluate, see 2021 is a safer year to do it, then I feel an apology to 2020 and a thank you for those that did get off trail is owed in that situation. The other thing is, what I've heard is that they're not recognizing the through hikes in 2020 because those people went against their request to get off trail. I guess normally, I mean, I didn't complete it, so I don't know, but I think normally if you complete it and you send your information in when you're done about your start date and your end date and some information, they will send you a certificate of completion. I think there's like a medal or some kind of, I don't know, something that they do that they engrave or something if you pay some money, and the money goes to both buy that stuff but also back into the trail. It's a really nice thing. So what I've heard is that anyone that completed in 2020, because it was against their recommendation, they're not doing any of that this year. So they're basically not recognizing the achievement of completing it in the year because you went against. Well, if you've now changed your mind and 2020 was a safe year and we could have done it, those people were right in your mind. Those people knew better than you. The hiking community knew better than you. The trail angels that support them, which I still heard there was a ton of trail angels out this year, even with COVID going on, which to me is a huge deal because a lot of trail angels are older and maybe in a higher risk group, and to still go out there and support hikers, as long as you're being safe and clean and trying to prevent the spread of stuff, but still support hikers. I think that's a wonderful thing, and to really be celebrated, those people that went out there and did that. But anyway, the people that finished were right, and were right to continue. And I think that should be acknowledged, and it should be acknowledged by the PCTA, by anyone that wants to put in for their certificate or their, whatever it is, their achievement or their medal or whatever, should be now. If you're going to allow 2021 to hike, that should be allowed. That should be recognized. I've also heard, not about the PCTA exactly, but I'm sure it applies, about on the AT there was a family that hiked with, I think, a couple and 3 girls, or maybe 2 girls, and one of the girls was, gosh, how old? I can't remember if she was like 7 or 8, or she was like super young. And I was shocked. I'm shocked that you can get kids to do it. I'm shocked when they're that young. And they talked about how much she loved hiking, and she would, if you took her backpack away from her to try to help carry it for her, she wouldn't hike any further. It just sounded like an amazing little girl. I think they did the whole AT, is what I read, the Appalachian Trail along the East Coast, and technically she would now hold the record for the youngest person to complete it. I think by a year or 6 months or something. It's really close, but she was still, because technically she was younger when she started than the other person who technically held the record. Well, I'm hearing the Appalachian Trail Association, or whatever their trail name or their association name is, will not recognize the record because it was on this COVID year where they asked people to get off trail. And that drives me insane, because one, that's a huge achievement for the girl to be able to do that at that age and her family, and that should be recognized. And in this case, with the PCTA, I don't know what the AT is doing, I haven't heard this year, but with the PCTA now doing permits in 2021, with no medical thing having changed, it's in fact got worse in most people's opinion, or in the facts we've seen and the numbers we've seen. You're allowing people to go out there. So there's really nothing wrong with them going out there. And I've heard nothing about super spreader events in these small towns like people talked about that would be because of these hikers. I've heard hikers being cleanly and careful and wearing masks, which I'd seen, and doing all the things we've been asked to do, and being very respectful of all those rules, and hostels and hotels along the trail and restaurants around the trail doing the same thing to provide for hikers, to provide for their seasonal income, but also to follow the rules and do it. So it feels like to me that the hiking community really stepped up. People were still able to hike, not as many, but trail communities and trail angels were still able to handle it and make the right decisions and do the right things. And they ultimately, in that case, were right about it. So my frustration with the PCTA is, if you're not going to recognize those achievements or any records that were set this year or people that finished the trail, but you're going to allow permits in 2021, I just don't get it. It's very frustrating. And like I said, it's not about me not wanting 2021 to hike. It's not about even the debate of that decision, whether they should or they shouldn't, whether it's safe, whether it's not. It's the point that if you're going to take a stance as the PCTA to ask me and the rest of the class of 2020 to get off trail, we respect that. And then basically you slap us in the face by saying, okay, but 2021 can, even though nothing's changed. And if something has changed, or even your knowledge of it has changed, that's fine. But you need to come forward and be honest, saying, hey, listen, we've learned, we've talked, we've discussed. It's unfortunate what we did to the class of 2020. And what you should do is honor anyone that still has a 2020 permit for any year, any start date they want from here on out going forward. 2020 is a free pass to use that permit to hike the trail. That's the right thing to do, to respect what you asked them to do, and the people that got off trail to respect the PCTA. Not to forget about them, not to move on to 2021, just pretend that didn't happen, to respect the records, respect the achievements of those who pushed on, that knew better than you, and then respect the people that respected you and listened to what you asked, even though it turned out to not be possibly the correct thing, is basically what you're saying by issuing them now. And let them use those 2020 permits at any point, at any start date, or even on their same start date on a different year, if you're worried about too many people on trail. Because I feel like enough people finished in 2020 and that will not attempt again in the next couple of years. And what does it hurt if you have a few more people on trail? And for those who did and can make it work again for another year, that put everything on hold and have filled in this gap of time with whatever they needed to do and then be ready to go again, that's a huge achievement. And for them to have to wait in line again and find a spot when they didn't really get to use it because of what you asked, not because they got off trail, not because they did something against the rules or called it quits. And I'm not saying give them a free pass. I'm just saying in this year particularly, when you ask them to get off trail, you need to honor those permits. So that's my rant. It's nothing against the PCTA personally. I'm sure they're great people, but you got to understand, and I'm sure I would hope there's former hikers and hopefully former Thru-Hikers on their board of directors or whatever that would understand it from that perspective. But being able to take 6 months away from a job or a life to do this is a huge thing for a lot of people. We're not all kids fresh out of high school that have that kind of money to go out there and do that. I'm happy for people that do and don't have the opportunity to just be like, oh, it didn't work this year, we'll try next year. For me, it was a dream crushed because of what you asked me to do, and you're literally slapping me in the face by saying, oh, now it's fine for 2021, because if you wouldn't have jumped the gun and if you would have let me continue to hike, I could have possibly, I don't know, but possibly finished in 2020 in the timetable that worked for me and my family, which 2021 is not a possibility, or 2022 or 23 or 20, it's not in the cards anytime soon now. So it's not that I personally need an apology, but understand that that's a big deal, and then you jumped the gun on that. And if you just said, hey, we jumped the gun, we were wrong, now when we reevaluate, we want 2020 to go out there, we think it's safe, and we're going to honor the records and the achievements and the permits from the class of 2020 and what we asked them to do. That's not unreasonable. I think that's a very reasonable thing to do, and I think they need to do the right thing and do that, just not ignore that like it never happened. Like, we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to talk about what we asked people to do, especially coming from a group that was so very much Texas saw another dog. Okay. Sorry. Another dog crossed the street, and heaven forbid. Especially coming from a group that was so... Another dog. Let's try this again. Especially coming from the PCTA that was so much like, you need to listen to us and get off trail, and seemed to be pretty upset about the people that were hiking on, at least in all the Facebook forums and PCTA forums, even the PCT class of 2020 and 2021 and 2019 pages on Facebook. There was a lot of debate back and forth, and anytime the PCTA posted something, they seemed to always have a comment or something about, you need to get off trail, you need to respect this. Respect the trail towns they're taking care of. And there was a lot of guilting about, you're hurting these trail communities. And I don't want to hurt the trail communities. I don't want to hurt the trail angel communities. Those are great people. And I don't want to hurt the PCTA. But you can't just forget about the class of 2020, pretend it didn't happen, sweep it under the rug or whatever, because that was the year. That was the year that I had to do it. That was the year I'm sure other people had to do it, and they can't just be like, oh, try again next year, to have 6 months free and plenty of money to afford to do that whole thing. That's just not reality for everyone. So when you ask people to do something, such a life-changing decision or a life-altering decision like that, I feel like it's owed that you give them a little more explanation of your new policy or new decision and why you chose what you did, and then find a way to take care of those people. Like, that's what the PCTA is supposed to be about, taking care of the trail, but also taking care of the hiking community that helps support you and the trail. So that's it. Rant over. That's my frustration. So for those of you who care, thanks for listening. For those of you who have no idea what I was talking about, if you stayed till this point, that's super cool. So peace.